Welcome to this video tutorial on daisy chaining online, specifically aimed at Pavlovia users, but it may be of more general interest. In this video, I'm going to talk about variables using an analogy of envelopes. So imagine you have an envelope and it's got a label on the outside, so we know what the contents represents, for example, winner, but we don't know who the winner is, so we don't know the value. So the variable name is the label on the outside, and the value that it takes is the thing that's on the inside. In daisy chaining, what we're doing is we're taking the contents of one envelope and then passing it into another envelope. And to do that, we need to use some code usually to take it out of the first envelope. And then we put it into the next envelope using URL parameters. So what are URL parameters? When we go to a website, the web address that we go to is known as the URL, or Uniform Resource Locator. And after the address, you can have a set of variables known as a query string or URL parameters, where you can have pairs of variable names and variable values. So imagine the address itself is like the address of a postbox, and then we have a question mark to say that we're starting a query string, and then we have a pair of name of the envelope, so name of the variable, equals contents of the envelope, so name of the value. And then if we've got more pairs, we need to put ands in front of them, ampersands, not more question marks. So any given web address with a query string will only have one question mark, but it could have multiple ampersands. So how does this work in practice? Well, let's look at an example where we might recruit somebody in Prolific and then send them on to the VESPR study portal to read participant information and maybe get allocated to groups. And then from there we'll send them to Pavlovia for an experiment. After they've done the experiment, we want to do a questionnaire, a long questionnaire, so we'll send them on to Qualtrics. Then after they've finished that, back to the debrief on the VESPR study portal, and finally back to Prolific for crediting their time. So at each stage we need to look at how do we set up the URL for the next stage within the stage we're looking at. So we're starting within Prolific. Within Prolific you can type in the URL of your study, and then if you select that you'll use URL parameters for the Prolific ID, then a set of a query string with pairs of envelopes and contents will be added to the URL that you set up. However, we need to change the first one because we want the VESPR study portal to understand what's coming in, and it uses the term ID. So instead of having Prolific PID equals and then the codes, there's the curly brackets and percentage signs Prolific PID, we're going to edit the name of the new envelope, the name of the VESPR study portal envelope, to ID. So that's how we take something from a Prolific envelope and put it into a VESPR study portal envelope. At the moment, the VESPR study portal doesn't read more than one URL variable for an incoming session, so it's not going to be able to read the study ID or the session ID. If that's important to you, then please get in touch. The other thing we need to do at this stage is think about how we're going to credit them at the end. And to do that, we want to redirect using a URL, and this is then a URL with a query string containing the variable called CC, completion code. So we have a completion code that ideally we don't want to show to the participant, but we want to be able to send them back to Prolific with that completion code. And we can do that in the VESPR study portal. So in the portal, you put in the web address, the URL of the experiment, in this case on Pavlovia. And then under advanced options, you can note that ID is a pass-through variable, so it's received as ID and it's sent out as ID as well. And then the portal will generate variables for participant, session and group. But there's also a field called credit URL, and that's where we paste in that completion code from Prolific, so that the portal will send people back to the right place. They'll see that at the debrief it will be below some customizable debrief text, so you can always customize that to make sure that people know how to get their credit. In Pavlovia, we need to make sure that we read the variables that have been sent by the portal. So if you go to experiment settings, then the experiment info by default has participant and session, but we need to add ID. So that's in the basic tab. If we shift to the online tab, this is where we put the URL for the next step. So the next step is Qualtrics. We paste in the Qualtrics web address, so the address for Qualtrics survey, but we need to use some code here. In Pavlovia, you start a piece of code by using a $, and then the Qualtrics URL should be recognized as text, so we need to put it in quotes. So I've got $, and then a quote, so double quote, then the web address for the Qualtrics survey, then a question mark to start the query string, then participant equals, close the quotes. Then we need to put a plus, because we're going to add another piece of text to this piece of text that we're creating in code. And then to get the Pavlovia, or to get the value of participant out of the Pavlovia envelope, we use expinfo with an uppercase I, and then square brackets, single quotes, and then participant. And then to add the next URL variable, we then put plus, double quotes, ampersand to start the next one, session equals, double quotes, and then plus expinfo session. So we've got these pairs where we keep switching between a piece of code, which is expinfo, which is used to get something out of a Pavlovia envelope, and then quotes, which contain the name of the next variable that we're setting up with pluses in between. Next, we're in Qualtrics, and we need to make sure that we receive those variables. And to do that, we do that in the survey flow, and set embedded variables, set embedded data, participant, session and ID, and also group if you need it. And if you type those in, it says value will be set from panel or URL, and we're going to be setting them from URL. So Qualtrics doesn't know what value they'll take yet, but when the study is live, it will receive values in the URL from Pavlovia. If you're going to use these values within your Qualtrics survey, you need to move the set embedded data block to the top of the survey flow. But if you're not going to use them, if you're only going to use them for the daisy chaining, then it doesn't matter where this block appears. To set up the next URL and put variable values into study portal envelopes from the Qualtrics envelopes, we need to edit the end of survey. And so at the end of the survey, we need to redirect to a URL. The website URL for the portal is always the same here, so it's mauricecarter.com/vesper/portal/debrief.php, and then add a question mark, and we need to send two variables, participant and session, So participant equals, and then the code to remove something from a Qualtrics envelope is in curly brackets e://field/ and then the name of the variable, and then close the brackets. And then as well, because we're using prolific, we need ID as well as participant and session. So the debrief will work with just participant and session, but in order to send the prolific participant ID back to prolific, we need to send it onto the portal again. Okay, and then finally, as far as the coding is concerned, we're back at the VESPR study portal, and we've actually already done this step. We've set it up earlier by pasting in the prolific completion code URL. There's now a button here on the debrief which says return to prolific, and by setting up the debrief text, here I've just put some example text directing people to press the button. And when they do that, so after they've finished the Qualtrics survey, they'll appear here at the debrief, they'll read whatever you've got, and then you push the button, or they'll push the button to return to prolific, and that will then send them back to prolific with the completion code and also their prolific ID. Okay, so hopefully that's helped with your daisy chaining. Please do ask on the Pavlovia PsychoPy discourse forums if you've got any questions.